And I'm just going to hide my screen, my view of myself here. So yeah, so I'm going to be going over knapweed, its history, its impacts, and its future in BC. I've been involved in invasive plant management for over 40 years. And of course, when I came on in the late 70s, as a student with the province, and starting in the 80s as a full-time employee, knapweed was the biggest invasive plant problem of the time. Just hang on a sec here. Not getting. There we go. So I'm going to be speaking today on spotted knapweed and diffuse knapweed. I'm not including Russian knapweed, but back in the 80s, the three species, spotted, diffuse, and Russian, were the main knapweed species we were dealing with. There is a number of other different knapweed species in BC, but they've been identified and mapped and over the last 35 years or so. A lot of the same management and biological processes work on all of the knapweed species. So spotted knapweed is typically known for its array flowers that are pink and purple. The identifying feature of this species is the black bracts that you see on the buds and the heads of the plant. The other species that I'm going to be speaking on today is diffuse knapweed. It's typically known for its white flowers, but sometimes purple. You can see here in the photo by Joe Tommaso, Di Tommaso. It's thought to be maybe a hybrid of spotted and diffuse, but typically we do see it as a white flower. It's very prominent bracts that are on the seed head or the flower head, and it has often been referred to as tumbleweed, but indeed the tumbleweed that people refer to is typically Russian thistle. So just maybe a comment on that. Knapweed is spread by seed. It is a taprooted biennial to perennial, and it has a very high seed production. You can see in irrigated situations, it's well above 18,000 seeds per plant and 25 for spotted. Less so on rangelands that are non-irrigated, drier sites, although they both flourish very well in a variety of sites and biogeoclimatic zones in BC. The common traits and characteristics are that seeds spread through a variety of vectors and pathways, usually associated with human activity, vehicles, people who are recreating, hikers, campers, livestock also spread the seeds. Knapweed baled up and infest and forage is often a spread, or has been over the years, and of course wildlife. We can do a lot to mediate the spread of knapweed through the first four activities. Wildlife becomes a little harder, but one of the things we always say is check your vehicle if you're in a knapweed or indeed any weed infested area to make sure you're not packing out seeds or plant parts. Check your animals and your own clothing and hiking gear when you're out recreating after you finish doing the hike. We don't want to be spreading any of our weed species any further than where they're currently infesting. Knapweed's first history and known locations in the Pacific Northwest were in BC, and we had Oyama in 1936 was the first site recorded, Penticton in 39 and 40, and in Grand Forks in 1944. Down in Bing Bend, Washington, we saw it in about 1907 appear, according to the records. It's thought that knapweed was initially brought in as contaminated alfalfa seed in the north central part of Washington, where there is a lot of alfalfa production, and it came across the border during those periods of times. It's thought that spotted knapweed first occurred in BC over in Nanaimo, and the thought was that it come over from Europe in the soil ballast that the ships used to put in their holds in their of their ships. They were coming over full of soil as ballast, and then they would be loading up on lumber. And Nanaimo was a very big coal producing area of British Columbia in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And that was a good spot for the knapweed to start, when they used to unload the soil from the ships to take on coal or lumber. Currently, we have about the distribution of spotted and diffuse knapweed across the province. You can see that diffuse is much less, by about 10,000 hectares less than spotted knapweed. The map is a bit misleading because these are areas that have been mapped for the both diffuse and spotted knapweed over the last 30 years. But we know that there's a lot of less infested area, especially for diffuse knapweed, than what shows on the map. Currently, we're looking at maybe updating some of the old sites and information on IAP. That'll be coming out in Invasive BC mapping system for invasives in 2022. So we'll be able to get a lot better information out of our data system. Some of the earliest known communications from the citizens of British Columbia, typically knapweed was a big concern to the ranching community of Central Interior, South Central Interior. In 1948, there was letters written to the Ministry of Agriculture talking about the effects of knapweed and asking about eradication methods. Back in those days, knapweed was just starting to occur and starting to see the impacts by the agricultural community, and they were very astute at it. In 1953, one of the local ranching families and Miss Jean Bostock sent letters to the letter to the minister as well, explaining her concern over the dangerous range weed diffuse knapweed. Back in the 50s to early 60s, there was some research being done by UBC. Knapweed was starting to increase quite a bit in these years, and of course it was increasing because not a lot of people knew about it. They didn't know how it was spread. It had no natural enemies to resist, to help keep it in check. So the philosophy of the day was typically to seek and destroy. Maybe well-meaning, but perhaps a little bit misguided and a little bit disorganized. Maybe government wasn't taking seriously the concern about knapweed that the ranching community and the agricultural community had on this specific weed species. Late 60s and early 70s, we started seeing more interest in knapweed species as a problem for the agricultural community, and also started seeing a concern for the natural resources of British Columbia and the impact that the knapweed species was having. It was moving along at a very brisk pace of infesting the South Central Interior and in these years. Landowners were using the known methods of the day, which were typically, we still use them today, but manual control, pulling the weeds out. But maybe they were also using other methods like burning the knapweed, which they didn't realize was probably doing more destruction and causing a more harmful effect on the native grasses than actually having a big impact on the knapweed. We know that burning knapweed does not control it being a deep-rooted perennial. Livestock associations were engaging the local government to get more serious about contributing resources to the knapweed problem. Provincial ministry staff, both in the Forest Service and Ministry of Agriculture, were taking on some responsibility to deal with knapweed sites. And typically those control programs were very spotty around the province, depending on the individual range manager or agrologist or specialist working in a specific area. The 70s brought the Ministry of Agriculture out to be doing more effective control or doing studies on effective control methods with herbicide trials. I was involved quite a bit in the late 70s, early 80s in doing timing and rate trials with a number of different herbicide products on the efficacy of knapweed control. Biological control of knapweed was starting to get underway in the 70s. The research scientists, the entomologists, were busy scouring Europe and Asia for naturalized biological control agents, both insects and pathogens, that were keeping knapweed in check in their native homeland, typically around Eurasia. And so these biocontrol agents were gone through a screening process to see how effective they would be at controlling the knapweed, whether they would live and perish in this environment, or whether they were going to take on another, maybe a commodity crop. Biocontrol has to be very specific, and I'll talk a little bit about that further down. But I won't dwell on it today because it's a tool and it's a very expansive tool. It would require more than the time I have today. Around 73, the Weed Control Act created financial incentives for livestock associations to engage local government. And in the mid-70s, the government began establishing spray programs through the Ministry of Transportation, Ministry of Agriculture, Forests, and Western Indian Agriculture Corporation, as well as livestock associations. So there was some government getting involved and putting more money into the knapweed battle with the ranchers and the agricultural producers. In 1977, the province and the partners recognized that there had to be some sort of coordinated strategic approach to knapweed management in British Columbia if they were going to get a hold on or a handle on it. And the Knapweed Action Committee was formed in 1977. Around 1981, the province was endorsing an accelerated knapweed control program as a result of the knapweed program that they had established in 77. And one of the parts of that program, besides incentives with local governments and associations, was a herbicide distribution program that the Ministry of Agriculture was in charge of. Between 1983 and 1994, there was over $670,000 worth of Tordon 22K active ingredient picloram distributed to all of many of the interior livestock associations in order for specific livestock producers to be involved in doing herbicide control of knapweed on their private lands, and in those days, some was also being carried out on crown lands. Not so today. Regulations require much more control over folks that are doing treatment with herbicides on crown lands. In the 1990s and then up to 2000, the collaboration between government, both local and provincial, livestock industries, First Nations, went a long ways and started creating an enhanced management program. Around that time, there was lots of local weed control committees that were formed, typically known today as regional invasive species organizations. That reason being, some of the local governments did not take advantage of the incentive programs to become involved in a weed control function that were offered by the Ministry of Agriculture. So a lot of livestock associations were the sort of leaders in helping form local nonprofit regional invasive species or weed control committees. Around the 2000s, the resources were starting to be redirected as new invasive plants um, um, became more priority in the province. It wasn't just knapweed anymore. It was things like leafy spurge. We started seeing Russian rush skeleton weed move in. Nowadays, there's a good host of a number of different high priority species, and indeed in some areas of the province, knapweed has taken a little bit of a back seat to some of the other weed species that are starting to proliferate in BC. Around the mid 2000s to around 2013, we saw the province engaged local governments and regional weed committees into pilot partnerships whereby the regional committee or the local government would form a management program for doing not only knapweed control, but other weed control on Crown lands. It was the program encompassed all of the different jurisdictions in the area. Historically, weed control was carried out by individual ministries on their jurisdictions, like Parks or Ministry of Forests or Ministry of Transportation. This was a partnership and a pilot that brought all the jurisdictions together, and they were all funding and directing one local program on all jurisdictions. So as a result of the increased knapweed populations that we've seen occur in British Columbia over the last number of decades, it's not only become an agricultural problem as it initially was and perceived to be, but it's become a problem for society and the safety. It's an uncomfortable barrier for recreationalists, impacting fishers and people that are recreating out in the natural areas. It's impacting traditional land use and food resources for Indigenous peoples. It's reducing roadside visibility, and it's creating a fuel situation for fires along corridors. And of course, wildfires the last decade have become a real serious concern in British Columbia. And weed infested areas are very quick to be lit up and spread very quickly. Environmental impact is forage reduction. It hinders native species succession, lost biodiversity, and it harms water quality as well. Some studies back a number of years in Montana saw an increase of sediment in creeks of over 200% when the adjacent riparian land was infested with spotted knapweed. Very poor water holding qualities with a tap-rooted plant that becomes a monoculture in areas where it gets established. Some of the economic impacts of knapweed over the last number of years. In '76, they were doing some studies and putting together some figures. There was potentially in $900,000 a year of lost forage in knapweed infested land for grazing cattle. In '83, the knapweed program was costing $1 million a year in British Columbia, with all of the agencies and organizations and particular individuals that were involved in carrying out control. Roy Cranston and Alf Botry and Roger Keep did some economic studies in '82 and figured that the cost to protect potentially infested grasslands would be 91 cents a hectare. That doesn't sound like very much, but on open grasslands and grazing lands that are native and so forth, that can amount to quite a bit of money. And in those days, that was 91 cents. I don't know what the equivalent would be today. In '92, the Cranston did some work and found that there was an annual loss of beef production in excess of $2.5 million. So that's that's 20 plus years ago. Some more recent economic information on knapweed is in '09, and it was costing about $1,137 per hectare to spray knapweed. So that's a big input. I think our costs have been reduced nowadays. We have met better, more effective herbicides and better equipment for spraying, and I think we're doing a lot more as far as the research goes to increase those the efficacy of our programs and our management schemes. Some of the past and present, back in when knapweed was first starting to become a real program with the accelerated knapweed program. Up here in the top right left, you can see some spraying that was going along some hillside. You're not going to see treatment like that being carried out these days. That pressure is just a little too high up there. You see typically more smaller spot treatment with smaller equipment like we see here on the top right. Seeding is always a good option and management tool in our toolbox for invasive plant management. And we can see that that's a lot of that's going on now with the post wildfire management, both with fire guards as well as burned areas. We want to get seed and vegetation regenerated and growing on those fire affected areas. The weeds are coming in really quickly after a fire. I was up in Barrier in about 7 days after the McClure fire went through in 03. I was up working with some local ranchers and producers. I was seeing 2 inches of growth with of Dalmatian toadflax and spotted knapweed 7 days after the fire had gone through and killed all the grasses and stuff. So it's very hardy, and like I say, fire is not a very effective management tool at all. The picture down in the bottom right is an interesting photo. It was this was a cedar packer unit that was developed by the Ministry of Agriculture in the 80s. We were doing a lot of seeding of the grass, lower elevation areas out in the Cache Creek, Ashcroft area. And some of those seedings are still noticed around the across from the New Gold mine west of Kamloops, and they were seeding crested wheatgrass. It's very hardy grass, perennial, very drought tolerant, exactly the kind of species characteristics that were needed for that hot, dry climates out in Ashcroft. What we found after doing these seedings, it was knapweed was not moving into these crested wheatgrass seedings at all. It was resisting invasion. So for quite a number of years, and even now in certain situations, crested wheatgrass is a preferred grass for revegetation. However, it does have some negative qualities with respect to persistence. Herbicide control of knapweed. These are the list of the herbicides that are most effective on knapweed. There's lots that aren't included here. Initially, the 2,4-D and picloram and dicamba and clopyralid were used for knapweed control. Very effective, moderate to long residual. Knapweed seeds, we did some research on burying knapweed seeds back in the 80s. After 14 years of burial, we were still getting 25% germination of knapweed seed. That's a long period of time for a seed to stay viable. So residual herbicides are really important when we're dealing with knapweed control using chemical means. We don't want to have to be going back every year to the same site to treat new germinates of knapweed with products like picloram and aminopyralid. We can see those long to moderate residual effects that control subsequent germinates at sites. This is a site that was done in the late 70s, early 80s, up above Kamloops, just southeast. And this is an area called Buse Hill. This is the Buse Lake Ranch. was it's owned by the Campbell family, and Larry was one of the very early proponents of the knapweed and management and weed management. He worked very closely with this. And you can see here on the left is diffuse knapweed that's infested, and on the right is area that was previously diffuse knapweed, and it was treated with Tordon 22K. You can see that real difference. So there was great grass recovery, and this area stayed knapweed free for many, many years, with just some maintenance and follow-up treatments that were occurred by the Abuse Lake Ranch. This area was eventually all sprayed. This is an example of the year following Grazon treatment down in the Nicola Valley. You can see the Nicola Lake in the background there. So this is just between Merritt and Nicola Lake. Grazon is picloram plus 2,4-D, and what a dramatic effect. You can't see hardly any grasses in the picture on the left, but getting rid of the knapweed and the competition from the knapweed, we saw this grass, the release of the native grasses that are there, and some domestics in there as well. There was no fertilization or any other follow-up treatments on this site. So this was the grass being suppressed by knapweed. Biological control in British Columbia, there's currently about 13 plus biocontrol agents for both diffuse and spotted knapweed. You can see some of the early releases in the late 70s with some seed head flies, the Urophora species, the Synoptera root beetle in 76. This really was the three species, I believe, that had the biggest impact on biocontrol, effective biocontrol on knapweed, specifically diffuse knapweed. And as well, some of the later insects that were released on knapweed for control were the Larinus beetles, and those were seed head weevils. Urophora was seed head, and you can see that there's root moth and a root beetle as well. Typical classical biocontrol is very successful when you get a number of different insects or pathogens working on the plant. You can see here we've got insects that work on the seed head, insects that work on the root. So it's impacting lots of different parts of the plant. So there was a paper done by Don Gayton and Val Miller in 2012, and it went and reviewed all of the impact of biocontrol on the two species in BC. And as you can see here, a descriptive evidence in this study points to the biocontrol program as being the most plausible explanation for the decline of diffuse and spotted knapweed cover values at representative sites in BC. And they think that the turning point was the dispersal of the root agents in the 1990s, with the addition of effective root feeders combined with seed feeders offered a rapid knapweed collapse. Now you'll see that in British Columbia, diffuse knapweed has been more effectively controlled by the biocontrol. We used to see diffuse as the primary knapweed species in the southern British Columbia. Not so now. It occurs in British Columbia. It's not really a high priority knapweed species, but spotted knapweed is still quite evident and is the primary knapweed species throughout the province now. This is diffuse knapweed at White Lake, which is south of Penticton, down by there's a Royal Radiological Radio Observatory down there. These are all of the antennas for the observatory. You can see diffuse knapweed here on the left in 85. It's probably belly high on the horses. Our ranchers have often told us that in those days, prior to effective biocontrol on diffuse in that country, that's what you would typically see. By almost 8 years later, we saw a dramatic decline, and here you can see the two ranchers riding through the same infested area that was shown on the left. Now, we will see over the period of longer periods, we see an increase and a decline in knapweed populations and densities, very much like you see a decline and increase with coyotes and rabbits. It's less knapweed, less insects, more knapweed regeneration, and so it's a bit of that bell curve. So it fluctuates from year to year, but this area is certainly a far cry better than it was, and without the use of herbicides, I think is a positive situation. So what can we do? I think we definitely collaborate. The successes that we've seen in invasive plants and species over the decades have been through collaboration. We have to learn to identify and contain the species and specifically be strategic on the treatment areas. Perhaps eradication isn't the goal. Perhaps containment is, and we wait for effective biocontrol to bring it down below that economic or environmental threshold that we need to get to have minimal impact. We want to reduce pathways for spread. The council is involved with the Ministry of Transportation currently over the last 7 years with doing weed control, invasive plant control in Ministry of Transportation gravel pits. And we're starting to see some really good successes and reduced infestations in gravel pits. We're not only using glyphosate herbicide, we're using some of the residual herbicides in strategic fashion in these gravel pits. We don't want any residual herbicides leaving those gravel pit sites. So there's a plan developed for each site. Establish weed-free areas or zones. So keep the weeds out. Don't let them move in. Once they get a foothold, then the work truly becomes a lot harder. And also we want to monitor biocontrol agents and identify the gaps that we need to fill where there may be biocontrol agents needing a boost or needing to be introduced to these weed infested sites. So this is the rolling grassland hills infested with knapweed. And these are grasslands that we would like to see. So with that, I'll just go through these last couple of slides. And this is a photo of the family that run the Onward Ranch. I can't recall their name, but Christy will tell us when she comes back on. And thanks very much for your time, folks. Hope you enjoyed the presentation, and I'll take questions now if Christy, if there's time for it.